Ever-rising housing price has been an issue, perennial issue actually, here in Korea. Every time there's a new government coming in, they say they're going to introduce a permanent fix. And after 4 decades of doing this, here in Korea, the views remain divided. Some people say maybe governments have not done enough so far, and others are saying maybe governments have done too much to distort the market itself, while others are saying actually there may not be much a government can do to fix the problem at all. So with new government in place, Moon Jae-in administration in place, we want to revisit this issue here. We want to take a look where we stand and where we are heading in terms of this issue of ever-rising housing prices right here in this program, Upfront.
With a recent hike in housing prices in Seoul and its metropolitan area, there has been growing talk of a potential housing bubble. In the meantime, the International Monetary Fund has released its Global Housing Watch report for the first quarter of this year. The report included house price-to-income ratios in selected countries with the index value of 100 in 2010. Korea stood at 86, ranking 25th on the list of 31 countries. The IMF assessment reveals that Korea's house price-to-income ratio has dropped 14% in 7 years. On the Global Residential Cities Index published last year by UK-based property consultancy Knight Frank, Seoul ranked 91st among 150 cities in terms of year-on-year house price growth. However, Korea's civic group Citizens Coalition for Economic Justice has released a conflicting report claiming the average house price in Korea is about $246,400 US, 8.8 times a country's GDP per capita. Korea's house price to GDP per capita ratio was second highest among the key countries, which the civic group said indicates the severity of housing unaffordability in Korea. Koreans also shared the view that home prices are far too high compared to what they earn.
산술적으로 이게 계산이 안 될 정도로 너무 높아요. 뭐 100만 원, 150만 원씩 모아봐야 10년을 모아야지 뭐 한 그 근소치 정도가 될까?
서울에서 내 집을 마련한다는 거는 아예 포기한 상태입니다. 제가 지금 연봉을 한 5천 전후로서 지금 받고 있는데요. 그 연봉으로는 제가 한 10년 동안 이상을 벌어도 서울에서 집 사기가 굉장히 힘들지 않나. 거의 못 산다고 봐야 되겠죠.
Then just how are the house prices doing here in Korea? On this week's Upfront, we assess whether Korea's housing market is in a bubble and discuss a range of issues related to home prices.
For today's discussion, we have Professor Shin Se-don. He's a professor of economics from Sookmyung Women's University joining us. Thank you very much.
Proud to be here.
And also we have Professor Cho Myung-rae. He's from the School of Urban Planning and Real Estate Studies at Dankook University joining us here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is a fascinating question, professors. As we know, as I mentioned in the introduction, this is a perennial issue in Korea, rising real estate price. And this interesting IMF study that we discussed in the video, just open our segment here, that Korea's problem is not that serious. Professor Cho, what do you see? What's your take on this IMF report as our start of the discussion? What's your take on this?
Well, actually, a bit puzzled when I heard that the Korea's house prices are not much high compared with other countries. This is quite different to what I believed so far. Well, my understanding is that particularly the housing prices in Seoul is quite high compared with our, the incomes. Also, the so-called PIR, the price to income is relatively high. But the IMF report reveals that Korea's house price is not that high compared with the major cities in the world. In this sense, what's the problem behind this kind of interpretation?
Right.
Well, I investigated the kind of inside of the story. I found that the report only covers the period from, I think, 2010 to 2016.
I see.
Yeah, that period is regarded as a kind of period when the house the market relatively stagnant.
Right.
So after 7 years boom, particularly during the Nomu현 government period.
Right.
So this is kind of natural that the PIR at Korea's PIR level is quite low compared to other period.
So depending on where you cut in terms of time scale, it could have made a difference.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Professor Shin, what's your take on this? Do you agree with his observation?
Definitely. 2010 is the starting point for IMF survey, but 2010 was almost the highest in housing prices for last 3 decades. So they compared the current price to one of the highest prices. That's why naturally the price seems to be lower by 15%. Another point is that during 2010 and 2017, well, the income has been rising almost 30%. So if you take 30% increase in the income, right, actually still the price has been rising about 17%. So IMF study is quite misleading. You have to be very careful in interpretation of that statistic. IMF statistics say from 2010 until now, housing price has declined 13%.
Right.
But during that period
relatively
of time,
speaking, right?
I mean, pointing at 2010 it becoming
because
100.
it was at the peak.
So yeah, that's what I say. So the price has been coming down about 13% compared to 2010. But for the 7-year period from 2010 and 17, nominal income has grown 30%. So you divide, the price by national income, naturally declined 13%. But that doesn't mean that the actual price has been coming down. Actually, the price has been rising about 17% for 7-year period.
Very interesting observation right there. I guess our viewers who are joining from all around the world now have better picture going beyond the IMF observation. The price of Seoul area housing price, that is the key issue, isn't it?
The PIR, we call it, the price relative to GDP per capita.
Right, that's national
In Korea,
average.
it's about 8.8, which is about 9.
Right.
But if you calculate that to the metropolitan Seoul area, it almost comes to 18. So twice the value of average, meaning that the price in metropolitan Seoul area is exorbitantly high, and the price in the rural area is incredibly low.
And if we look around the world, going beyond Seoul, Vancouver has been one place that have had this issue. According to last year's UBS survey, the survey said that Vancouver showed the most overvalued housing price overall. So here we are connecting with Professor Thomas Davidoff. He's from the UBC, University of British Columbia, Sauder School of Business. And then he will be answering some of our questions that we have. And we will get back to our discussion after watching his interview right here.
Well, you can certainly spend $20 million on a single-family house, but that would be a very lovely home. A sort of ordinary single-family home on the west side of Vancouver might sell for 2.5 million Canadian dollars, which is a great deal of money, of course. In Seattle, adjusting for currency, you would probably spend less than $1 million Canadian dollars. By contrast, rents in Vancouver are a little bit higher than in Seattle, but the ratio of rent to price is very low here. So we've got very, very high prices for incomes. Local incomes have a hard time supporting the current price level. It's not Canada-wide that we have affordability problems. Largely, Vancouver and Toronto have seen the largest run-ups. Prices have increased elsewhere. But I think the greatest dissatisfaction is in Toronto and in Vancouver. Greatest increase in prices came in early 2016. I'd say between the winter of 2015 and the summer of 2016, in many neighborhoods, prices rose as much as 30 or 40%, and they were already very expensive. So these were shocking price increases. Around the summertime, even before the foreign buyer tax, and especially after it, single-family home prices came down a lot. Apartments fell, maybe not as much as single-family homes. But since about February of this year, the market for apartments has gotten very hot, and prices may be 20, 25, 30% higher than they were even last summer for apartments or townhomes.
And there was Professor Thomas Davidoff from UBC Sauer School of Business. Professor, so your observation on this very extraordinary phenomenon.
Yes.
Professor Cho, what do you take out of his
Well,
words?
basically, the Vancouver's house prices increased almost more than 40% over the last 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
The main cause behind was, the mainly the inflow of foreign capital, particularly China capital, to the Vancouver.
Chinese money.
Yeah, Chinese money.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And the interest rate is very low.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the currency value
Right.
of the Canadian money is very low also.
I see.
This is three causes, I think, important kind of mechanism to
Interesting.
make
Right.
the price. Yeah.
That's an interesting point. Professor Shin, we've been, people around the world have been talking about what is going to happen as a result of QE that has been quantitative easing that has been going on since the 2000 global crisis. And would you say then, according to Professor Cho's comment, it was Vancouver where actually we saw the bubble resulting from this the liquidity, excessive liquidity coming in the form of Chinese money?
Definitely, I think that the phenomenon in the housing market in Vancouver or British Columbia in general, definitely it's a speculation, speculative bubble. And one of the main causes is definitely Chinese money. That means that Chinese investment is not for a real demand for housing.
Right.
They want the speculation. So they want to make money out of housing investment. So when there has been some kind of policy change in either United States or Canada,
Right.
For example, interest rate hike, then the housing market will be affected by that, and all of a sudden Chinese money will be drawing their money out of that. So sooner or later, the British Columbian housing market boom
Right.
will be burst. And we saw that. We saw that kind of housing
Right.
market bourbon in San Francisco or in California or in eastern United States. So it's a typical capital market bubble, especially in housing
So
market.
every time we see a bubble, every time we see a boom, we think about bubble, and bubble is followed by popping of the bubble. That's what we're scared about. Talking about speculation, Professor Cho, the current situation in Korea, many of us seem to perceive what's happening to the real estate market in Korea right now as we speak is possibly a bubble. Some people say, and others are saying, no, it's not bubble. It's what's happening, sort of like a normalization of the market or recovery of the market after years of stagnation.
Right.
There are two fundamentally different perspectives. Your take on this?
Well, it's difficult to say whether this Korea's house prices include or comprises bubbles or not. It's very difficult to measure. But the one thing clear is that house prices recently increase is more than the consumer prices, definitely. For instance, over the last few years' time, the house consumer prices increased 1% or something like that.
Right.
But last year, house prices increased by almost 4 or 5%.
Is this nationwide or
nationwide?
So would you say once again do we see this rise of the average price mostly led by the rise in Seoul metropolitan areas?
Yes.
Once
Well,
again,
if
the same problem.
just you take the case of the reconstruction apartments in Gangnam area, the last year the price of that house increased almost by 18%.
Okay.
Extraordinary,
18%.
actually.
Unbelievable
Yeah.
in that case. So, Professor Shin, in your case, once again, do you have concerns about this Seoul-driven, I'd like to say speculation, but boom that's leading the overall national average upwards?
You have to look at the history of housing prices for at least 3 decades. There has been periodical peak, slump, peak, followed by slump.
Right.
And if you look at the recent period, the current boom in or rising in the prices has initiated from 2013-14. Exactly after the Park Geun-hye government, when the Choi Kyung-hwan, then Vice Prime Minister, in order to kind of encourage, Korean economy, they lowered interest rate a number of times. They reduced the regulations about the lending. So the recent phenomenon in housing market is kind of a policy oriented, especially under Park Geun-hye government. So if we cut the interest rate, I mean raise the interest rate sooner or later, or if the government adopt the LTV DTI regulation back to the normal situation before the Park Geun-hye government, well, generally speaking, the housing market will return to the normal stage.
Okay.
Except for the very small area, small section of the period, the area that shows a highly speculative movement. So the government action or reaction or policy to the housing market should not be the general one. It's got to be a selective one and a pinpoint to the place where actually the bubble is significant.
More of a surgical strike.
Yeah, they call it pincer kind of policies.
Professor Cho, Professor Shin mentioned that what we are seeing right now is a result of what Park Geun-hye government has done. Then would you reject, if you agree with him?
Absolutely agree.
You agree with him. But what about the observation that some people are actually excited about the real estate market because we have a new government?
Current situation of new government is quite similar to the early stage of Cho Myung government.
I see.
So which government? I mean, the Cho Myung government also inherited a lot of legacies for the supporting the boom market, the boom in the market. Hundreds kind of policy packages were inherited to the Cho Myung government.
They tried really hard.
Yeah. So the current situation is quite similar to that situation. So without controlling or normalizing this often kind of measure for the housing market, booming. So this government cannot control, the speculation movement, or speculation mood, whatever. Okay, there is little kind of room for the current government to control this kind of speculative investment or, the booming in housing market.
Very fair observation to counter the public belief here, right?
Yes.
And talking about, Professor Shin, talking about Korea's real estate policy, our viewers may think, well, if rising housing price is a problem, why don't governments just suppress the price rise?
Economy was so kind of slumping in 2014, 2013. So the only objective of the government to kind of encourage economy, they have to take the kind of a construction in the housing market. So they lower the interest rate. They loosen the LTV DTI regulation.
You're talking about the previous Park government.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the result of that has been rising in the prices of house, and it continued until recently. Now, the price has been rising so fast, so much for the last 4 years. And now the government is realizing that we have to kind of calm down the housing market.
Boom and bust.
So then the choice is returning to the normal type of regulation in lending, which is, again, reducing the LTV DTI to maybe 50% or 60%. But the problem is, if they do so, economy is in trouble now. The first quarter economic growth is 1.1% growth as of the previous quarter, and 100% of the 1.1% growth is coming from construction. So if the government tries to tighten the housing market, they have to wonder, what's going to be the effect of the economic growth?
Construction business being still that big is kind of like a shocking reminder, because we think we are moving ahead and leaving behind this old style industries, but construction market is, he has reminded that it's still important. Another issue is the debt, right? Consumer, the household debt in Korea.
Well, currently the household debt amount 1.3 trillion won, which is enormous.
Enormous amount,
Well, actually, over last particularly 3 years, since 2014, when the Park Geun-hye government introduced softening the lending regulation, particularly DTI, LTV. the debt, household debt increased very sharply. For instance, over just 1 year, household debt increased by 0.1 trillion won every year.
Oh gosh, okay.
Enormous.
Right, right.
And now, if you measure the burden of the debt on the household side, if you compare, for instance, measure the ratio of disposable income to household debt, it's amount to almost 180 or near 170, something like that. The OECD average is 128, something like that.
So big difference. Korea
big
is
difference,
way
highest,
ahead.
I think,
Right,
highest.
Right. So indeed, that is a problem because once economy goes down, or if there's a case where the banks will have to raise their interest rate, as we may face the situation right now, as other interest rates elsewhere are going up, this could mean households going bankrupt.
That argument is going too far.
Is it going too far?
Going too far?
It's not going to get that bad.
Yeah. Okay. The problem is, even if interest rate goes up by even 1 or 2 percentage points, the problem sector is only a small fraction of the people who borrow from the bank.
Okay.
That percentage, I think, is estimated to be about between 15 and 20%.
Okay.
Those 15–20% of the households would have a trouble if interest rate goes up.
So you're saying the amount is big, but the proportion, the percentage of the people who have done this
substantial proportion of the people, they are capable of paying that because LTV has been almost 50%.
I see,
okay,
I see.
so the amount of the loan compared to the value of the house is about 50%. So there's plenty of room for paying off. So the trouble is, in the case of interest rate hike, is about 15 to 20% who has no job, no income, okay, who can't pay even the current interest rate. Those people might be trouble.
Sort of like subprime borrowers in the United States that has caused the problem in the United States.
And even in that case, if that happens, those people, 15–20% not being able to pay off, still the banking sector has the room to kind of adjust to the trouble.
Okay.
And finally, there's a issuing power of Bank of Korea. So it would never ever happen, kind of a financial system collapse because of housing market. It's kind of a too overestimation.
That really is a relieving observation when we face all this troubling news around us. Then, Professor Cho, let's look ahead as our final point.
Yes.
A lot of people are debating and speculating or wondering what's going to happen to Korea's real estate market in the long run. And majority seems to believe that because we have declining population, demographics tells us that eventually Korea's housing market will have to go down.
Yes, many kind of variables relate to demand in market, house market. It's quite a significant change over 10 years or a few decades time. As I mentioned, the size of a population who was supposed to purchase house in the market reduced very much. Particularly, working the age group has begun to reduce the last year.
I see.
Also, size of the households also begin to smaller and smaller.
Okay.
Nowadays, almost a one-person family or two-person family almost occupy more than half of total, the family.
So
the
fundamental transformation is already occurring then.
And also ordinary households also very, feel very strong kind of the burden on the maintaining house itself. It costs a lot. You have to pay. Also, you have to pay cost to maintain or for tax whatever. Also, most of the consumers they not expect increased price in the future. So they borrow money from the bank. The house price doesn't increase. What will happen to them?
Exactly. So that's going to be a problem. Then, Professor Shin, as a closing point, we have mentioned that recently, again, people have borrowed a lot to buy their housing. Then, if we compare that phenomenon with Professor Cho's point, then these people who are borrowing now are making wrong bets, basically.
Definitely. They're going to lose some money.
Okay.
They're going to lose some money from their investment in houses, especially those people with the number of houses other than the house that he is living in. So definitely we're going to expect a very slow or even decline prices in houses and a very low interest rate, very low percentage of increase in the population. So definitely demand for houses will be declining over time. So I'm pretty sure that a substantial portion of the people will lose their investment in their housing market investment.
Interesting closing remark right there. There was Professor Shin Se-don and also Professor Cho Myung-rae having shared with us very interesting observation and perspective. And I'm sure our viewers who have joined from all around the world have learned a lot about this very interesting phenomenon of real estate market in Korea. And next time when we talk about these issues that matters for Korea as well as the world, we want to ask you once again to join us. Until then, this has been Kim Byung-jun. Thank you very much.